Shuda. I'm the president of Transition Town Greater Media. For those of you who don't know, we were founded 15 years ago as part of the international transition movement. We have a group that explores alternatives to business as usual approaches, looking for positive action to create regenerative systems to help regenerate broken ecosystems, food systems, economic systems, and social systems. So we work in teams based on our skills and interests, and those groups come together. At last count, I think we had 18 working groups. So if you're interested in this kind of work, check out our website at transitiontowngreatermedia.org. I want to express our gratitude to the Providence Friends for hosting this event tonight. And I wanted to do a brief land acknowledgement for, we were just talking about the Lenni Lenape, and some of the lessons that I'm hoping we can sort of presence in the kind of work that we're doing and learning that we're doing tonight. And first of all, the idea that they lived in harmony with nature, and secondly, that they were kind to others, and third, that they lived at peace with their neighbors. So, and of course, the Lenni Lenape are the people who are the stewards of this land before we were here. Tonight, I am honored to introduce Don Hall, author of the Regeneration Handbook and pioneer of the Transition Town movement, and dare I say, now a friend of mine as well. So really pleased to have him here. I've got to meet him over the weekend as he was sharing his wisdom with some of us. And he started out in the world as an outward bound instructor. And then he was involved with one of the first transition town movements, or the first transition town initiatives in the United States in Boulder, Colorado. He was also the founder of Sarasota Transition Town in Florida. He was then the executive director of Transition US. And then he was working on this book, and since then he has become the training coordinator for the International Transition Network movement. So really pleased to have Don share his wisdom about the Transition Town movement, the Regeneration Handbook, and I'll turn it over to Don.
Yeah, so thank you all for being here. Thank you to Transition Town Media for hosting this event, and to the Providence Friends meeting for having us here in this building. Never been a Quaker, but feel quite at home in this environment. So yeah, I'm here to talk to you tonight about the Regeneration Handbook. I've been working on this for about the past 2 years, and I'm currently on a tour of the US that I'm calling the Regenerative Communities Roadshow. Started in Boulder, Colorado, through Montana, up to Washington State, down the West Coast, across to Florida, and then here to Pennsylvania, and it still continues on. So yeah, I want to start, as I normally do with these talks, in getting you all talking to each other a little bit. I think very much at the heart of this movement for regenerative communities is community itself. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to find, if you can, 2 other people that you don't already know. If that's not possible, that's okay. But just take a few minutes to talk about what this word regeneration means to you. We see it coming up more and more in our culture, and it applies to lots of different things, from agriculture to economics to leadership. But what does regeneration mean to you? So let's just take a few minutes for that.
So I'm excited to get back into it. It's easier to fall apart and then you start falling apart.
So The danger of getting you all talking to each other in the beginning is that you'll have so much fun doing that you won't want to listen to me. But yeah, I'd love to hear any highlights, anything that seemed particularly interesting or important that came out of your groups, either something that you said or that somebody else you heard say. Yeah, great.
Claire was saying how she discovered Ray Anderson's story. He was the carpet CEO of Interface Carpet, and he had an epiphany after reading the book Biomimicry by Gene Benyus that what he was doing in his business was kind of going against the natural way of things. So he decided to turn the company around and align it with nature's ways, nature's principles. Gave this goal, he called it Mount Sustainability, or climbing Mount Sustainability. So she was really into that, and I hadn't really thought of Ray in a long time because I've known about him too. So that's very inspiring.
It's a great story, and it shows how regeneration isn't just limited to regenerating degraded ecosystems, but also can be applied to business, finance, economics. Other definitions of regeneration or
Yeah, I
thoughts?
got to talk to Bob over there on the end, and he was talking about how although he's not a Quaker himself, he finds Quakers the Quaker way to be very attractive and creates a safe space for communication, and how all of this support for more open communication can regenerate trust in our society, and regenerate the ability to talk to each other again.
Thank you.
Well said. There's this kind of spiritual dimension of regenerating ourselves as people and regenerating our culture as collectives. Anything else anybody wants to say? Other aspects of regeneration? Yes, please.
One of the things we were talking about was regeneration, a lot of in the sort of the biological sense of regrowth after a disturbance, but then what the goal of that regeneration is, because it's in a new context of where we are in the present, and it can't, it's going to be a little different than the way it was originally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite definitions of resilient regeneration is doing better than less bad. Often that's the goal in the environmental movement, and that's important, but it's really not enough. We have this word sustainability, which is still a great word. I use it from time to time. But we know, one, it's been much abused, and two, it's not particularly inspiring. There's the old joke of, how's your marriage? Oh, it's sustainable. I'm so sorry to hear that. So regeneration points to our ability to create the future that we want. Our ability to help bring ourselves, each other, and the world back to life. That human beings could actually be a net positive here. And I believe that regeneration is in each and every one of us, and that it's the very nature of life itself. So starting at the very beginning, literally, 13.8 billion years ago, the birth of our expanding universe. Since then, life has tended consistently towards greater complexity and abundance, while maintaining an extraordinarily delicate balance. Evolutionary cosmologist Brian Swimme says that if the rate of expansion of the universe was just 1/1,000,000th of 1% faster, primordial matter would have been flung so far apart that galaxies, planets, and stars wouldn't have formed. But if it was just 1/1,000,000th of 1% slower, everything would have collapsed into a black hole, ending the potential for life as we know it. So life is incredibly precious. Same thing could be said about Earth. Some of you might be familiar with James Lovelock's Gaia theory. He basically put into scientific language what indigenous cultures have been saying since time immemorial, which is that our planet is alive. And in fact, it's a self-regulating superorganism. And he gives a number of proofs for that. After all, Lovelock was an actual rocket scientist. He worked in NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, looking for life on other planets. And one of my favorite proofs of his Gaia theory is that for billions of years since the emergence of life, ocean salinity has stayed at around 4%, despite salt being continually washed from land into the oceans. And he gives a lot of credit to a tiny creature called coccolithophore that captures the excess salt in its shell and deposits it back into the ocean floor when it dies. Amazing. How does the coccolithophore know how to do that? How might a self-regulating Earth work? We don't really understand it, but we can look to ourselves. You know, we often think of ourselves as a species apart, but we are nature, human nature. You know, it can be mind-boggling to even think how trillions of different organisms could cooperate to create the conditions conducive to life on Earth. But we all have trillions of cells within our own body that have evolved to know, without us even consciously thinking about it or controlling about it, how to keep our own body in an optimal balance. It's quite a miracle if you think about it. And, you know, human beings, for 97% of our existence, have lived very close to nature in symbiotic relationship with it. It's really only been within this pattern, within this period, this last 10,000 years, that we've moved away from that. That we've separated ourselves from nature, organized ourselves in towns and cities, enclosed and divided up the commons, developed sophisticated hierarchies to control surplus resources and labor. And this has continued apace ever since, this kind of relentless growth based on the subjugation of nature and indigenous peoples. You know, through the founding of states, empires, European colonialization. But it really started to take off only about 260 years ago with the fossil-fueled Industrial Revolution. Human beings tapped into the most prolific energy source that we've ever had in our history. And that has caused everything to grow like crazy. So this is one possible depiction of the times that we're living in. These last 260 years, modern civilization. You know, for thousands of years, life looked pretty much the same and changes were pretty slow. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there were only 600 million people on this planet. Now we're almost at 8 billion. So we could look at this period as a series of exponential growth curves. Some positive, higher material standards of living, rapid advances in science, technology, medicine, but also obviously lots of kinds of growth that are not so beneficial. So deforestation, depletion of fisheries, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And we've reached a point at which if every person on this earth lived like the average American, according to the Global Footprint Network, we would need 5.1 Earths to sustain us. And try as we might, we haven't found the other 4 yet. I don't think we're going to. So more and more of us are waking up to the fact that the status quo is no longer an option. That we can't continue on with business as usual. And that's a good thing. People are starting to seek out alternatives. But, understandably, a lot of us are left wondering what to do or even how to start. Because these challenges are so complex, they're so large, and they're so urgent. So I can definitely relate to that. I first got involved in activism back in college, about 24 years ago now. I got involved with the Students for Free Tibet initially, then got drawn into the anti-war and anti-globalization movements of that time. I was actually here at this protest in London where 1.5 million people marched against the Iraq War before it started. And of course we won. Just kidding, sorry. It's a little harsh. I read an article about a month ago that said that the George W. Bush administration was planning for this. They expected this, and they just figured it into their plans. So eventually I started working more and more on climate change, seeing that as perhaps the most profound and impactful issue of our time. But I became more and more disenchanted with this kind of conventional political activism. Not that it's not important. We still need to do this. We still need to get out in the streets, probably especially in the lead up to November. We need to speak truth to power. We need to confront injustice. But, I have a number of reasons to believe that maybe this isn't the most effective approach to solving our global environmental crisis. Focusing on single issues, very effective in a way, but we know that we're in the midst of a social, environmental, and economic polycrisis with many, many different issues to address, and they're all interconnected. Also, this kind of activism typically doesn't present an alternative vision of the future, just the absence of something. So what are we actually going towards? What kind of society, what kind of civilization do we really want, and how might we actually bring that about? What might be the alternative systems and structures and culture that can make that happen? So I started looking for a different way, and I didn't really even know where to look. But when I was in graduate school in Boulder, Colorado, I stumbled upon it in the form of permaculture, in the form of intentional communities, and in the form of the International Transition Towns movement, which I've now been part of for the past 15 years. And I think this represents a very different kind of activism than the one that most people are most familiar with. And I've come to call this evolutionary change for 3 reasons. One, there's a recognition that we've arrived at an evolutionary bifurcation point as a species, a major fork in the road in humanity's history, where we can either continue this grand evolutionary journey of the past 14 billion years, or potentially push the Earth and ourselves into some kind of de-evolutionary state. Second, I believe the level of change that is currently needed can be thought of as an evolutionary leap. It's not enough anymore just to tinker with existing systems, to try to reform existing policies. Those things can be very important, but we need more than that at the same time. As I say in my book, we need change on the level of our fishy ancestors crawling up onto land for the first time, or plants developing photosynthesis to harness the energy of the sun. So what might that look like for us? It's an interesting question. And third, the approach I believe will be most effective is evolutionary in nature. That, while revolutionary moments are important, they don't happen often, and they're often the result of long, patient organizing and power building. And we have to recognize that. Evolutionary change is also deeply based on natural and universal patterns. And this concept of a pattern most immediately comes from this 1977 book on towns building and construction, which is very worthwhile checking out even if you're not in those particular fields. Brilliant book. My definition of a pattern is very similar to theirs. Something that reliably works across a wide variety of contexts. So the simplest metaphor I've come up with this is learning to tie your shoelaces. There are certain ways to tie your shoelaces that work, and there are some that don't. And once you've learned it as a small child, how to tie your shoelaces, you can transfer that to any pairs of shoes that have laces. Probably not my flip-flops. I also use this term meta-pattern. I'm not trying to be clever here. I actually found this a very useful term that there was no word for. And I define that as a pattern that repeats across many different fields and scales. So there's some to unpack here, and that's what we're going to do now. So the first meta pattern I encountered was the U shape of transformation. And this comes from Theory U, which is a system, a map, a model developed by MIT professor Otto Scharmer. In the early 2000s, him and his colleague Joseph Jaworski interviewed 150 leading scientists and entrepreneurs from all over the world about their creative process, about the nature of innovation, and they found a pattern that we all start with downloading, which is essentially applying the patterns of the past to current situations. And that works fine in a lot of circumstances. We don't want to have to think about a creative way to twist a doorknob every time we want to walk through a door. But in the face of an unprecedented global polycrisis, downloading is not going to cut it. We need to go on a journey of discovery and transformation. And the first step in that is suspending our downloading, what we think we know, who we think we are, and initiating seeing, which is about taking in new information, making new connections. Partly through books like the Regeneration Handbook, talks like this, but more importantly, by having direct experience, sometimes called walking around in the system, meeting new people, trying new things out, and learning more about whatever situation that we're focused on. And as we do that, naturally we begin to sense into what does all this new information mean? How does it shift my perspective on the world, on myself, on my community? So we're sensing into that, which leads us into a state of presencing, which is about retreating and reflecting and allowing inner knowing to emerge. And this doesn't necessarily mean you have to go on a meditation or yoga retreat. Great if you do, but it's about creating some space in our life for something new to emerge, however we do that. And if we stick in this state of presencing for long enough, something will begin to emerge, inevitably. And it might be very vague at first, just a spark of inspiration, light bulb going off, some kind of epiphany. But we don't actually know what it means yet. It might just be a feeling. But we contemplate and we crystallize. I use the metaphor of imagining holding a diamond in the palm of my hand and turning it over and over again in the light to really get to know it. And so our understanding, our vision crystallizes. It may not be 100% clear. We may not be able to get to 100% clear. And if we wait to get to 100% clear, we may talk ourselves out of ever doing it. But at some point, if we want to continue, we need to launch our idea, our inspiration, our vision into the world. And when we do that, we get feedback. People like it, they don't like it, it works, it doesn't work. And we learn from that, and we iterate. Prototyping is very much in the spirit of an experiment. And if we continue with that long enough, we will eventually find something that works, that reliably works. Performing isn't the end of our journey of transformation here. We go through this process many, many times. But it's also not a myth to say we can find something that works and we can share it with others. We can teach others how to do it and adapt to their own circumstances, can replicate it in other places. So I think this is a really good, clear map of the creative process of transformation and how we can bring new ideas into the world. But there are many others as well. Those of us who might be familiar with Joanna Macy's work that reconnects, the spiral of the work follows a very similar pattern. That's at the individual level. At the level of a group, stages of group development follow a very similar trajectory of stages. Different language, different numbers of stages, but very, very similar. And at the collective movement level, the 5 stages of transition. Perhaps the most well-known example of the U-shape of transformation is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Right? That starts with the hero protagonist in a state of relative ignorance and bliss, but then gets called forth on a great adventure and faces many trials and tribulations, receives some kind of revelation in the depths, gains some kind of boon, and then the rest of the process is about how to bring that back to the ordinary world to sustain and enrich it. So seeing all of these correspondences, and if you look at my book, there's probably close to 24 examples of the U shape of transformation. I started thinking, oh, I feel like I'm onto something. I've never heard anybody talk about this before, but this is a really fundamental pattern that exists in a fractal way across all sorts of different scales. This is really how change happens, not just a theory, a perennial philosophy of transformation, if you will. And I thought that was pretty much it. That was my big insight. But as I started writing, I started noticing other patterns that were repeating at different fields, different scales, that were spoken of in different languages throughout the ages. And the next one I discovered was the ripples of expansion, which is the idea of starting wherever we are and gradually rippling out through there, through zones of greater and greater influence. So one example of this from my book is what I call the zones of evolutionary change. So we need to start with ourselves. This is really important and not often said, that in wanting to help the world, to make some kind of positive contribution, we should look at ourselves first. If we don't, we can end up doing more harm than good, actually. So some kind of inner transformative practice, some kind of reflective practice, and there's hundreds people can choose from. Of course, if we all needed to be enlightened to engage in activism, there would be nobody left to do it. But some kind of level of maturity, emotional self-regulation, I think is really important to being a leader in the world. We also need to apply our values in our daily life. Grow that garden. If we can afford to put up those solar panels and get the electric car, bike around or walk around or take public transit when we can. Take our money out of harmful investments and invest it locally. As Transition to Greater Media is doing with the Circle of Aunts and Uncles. So living our values can actually teach us a lot about how change happens. And can give us a lot of compassion and gentleness towards those we are seeking to inspire to change. If we can do those well, maybe we can be of some real help to our community. To be a leader in our community and help show the way. And if we can do that well, maybe we could be influential at the national or international levels. Teach other people how to regenerate their local communities. And hopefully we'll just leave the rest of the universe well enough alone. I think this pattern is particularly noteworthy because it looks like a straight linear progression, right? But the motto here is in integral thinking, transcend and include, right? So even if we've managed to make it up here, to some kind of national or global influence, we still need to be working on ourselves. We still need to be living our values. And we still need to be in touch with the grassroots. Otherwise, we can become very ungrounded in our work, very abstract, out of step, and unhelpful. So you put the U shape of transformation, the ripples of expansion together, and what do you get? You get a spiral. So you see that a spiral is really a series of U shapes. And if we tip this spiral over on its side, look at it from the top or the bottom, we can see those ripples of expansion. They're both there. No wonder the spiral is such a powerful symbol for change in our world. This is what I call vertical change, which I define as changes that unfold only over time. And as we move from one stage to another, one level to another, there's different conditions. There's different situations, different people, different things we need to learn. But vertical change implies that there's a horizontal change as well. So what about that? I define horizontal change as the development of innate capacities, things that are with us at every stage of the journey. And the first meta pattern of horizontal change I call the mandala of wholeness, because in Hindu and Buddhist cultures where mandalas are used, very similar thing in some North American indigenous cultures with the medicine wheel. But particularly looking at Buddhist and Hindu mandalas, often there is some kind of central deity or some central principle that underlies and makes possible the working of this whole sacred world of the mandala. And it's surrounded by all the different manifestations of that source. So wholeness, all the different parts of ourselves, of groups, of movements. What are those different elements that need to be considered? So here's one tool that I created based off of the mandala, the 5 Buddha families in Tibetan Buddhism. Just basically putting it into more secular language, that we need to place our own well-being at the center. If we're not mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally healthy, we're not much of help to anybody else. But that's not all we need to pay attention to. We need to develop our intellect. We need to learn more. We need to create more detailed maps of reality. We need to sharpen our perception. We also need to create a strong practical basis for our life, our home, our family, our friends, our community. And we need the heart, because otherwise life is pretty boring. We need to follow our passions, follow our bliss, seek out love, self-expression. And of course, we need to inquire into our deeper purpose. What might be our calling? And I find that when all these things are active, operating, in balance in my life, that I'm active, operating, and in balance, that I'm my best self, and can give the most to the groups that I'm a part of, to the movements I'm a part of. But when any one of these is taken out of the picture for too long, I become a little wobbly, maybe, like a chair where a leg was taken out. So I call this to mind every so often and just think, how am I doing in these areas? How am I paying attention to them? Which ones am I neglecting? So this is all kind of thinking about how we can be change makers and activists that are in this for the long run without just burning out and giving up. I think this is important. And the last one is the yin-yang of balance. yin-yang because it's the most well-known symbol of balance, but also because it incorporates a lot of key elements of what balance is in this one symbol. So there's an interdependence and harmony between opposites. Each has a little bit of the other inside it. And there's a constant sense of motion here. Like there are two fishes kind of chasing each other's tails. We often think of balance as a static thing. We have one extreme, another extreme, and we just split the difference, and then it's balance. But balance is always shifting. We can think about this in change-making work as a balance between action and reflection in a group. Sometimes we'll be way over on the side of action. We got a big project going, we got a deadline. That's appropriate. Sometimes we might find ourselves way over on the reflection side of the spectrum. We're processing that big thing that we did and trying to take lessons learned from it. And sometimes it will be more in the middle. But the important thing is that that both are always included. Same thing with strategy and emergence. So we always need to be thinking strategically, be skillful about what we're doing, but at the same time allow for spontaneity and change. So not get fixated to any particular point. So this was the best visualization of horizontal change that me and my illustrator were able to come up with. I'm not sure it really says anything in addition, but really the forms of these patterns are not the most important thing. The most important thing is that we engage these four aspects of continual transformation, expansion, wholeness, and balance in our work, and that they're really part of one single dynamic process that is based on how nature and how evolution works. Wouldn't even be able to create a picture of what that might look like, but that's not important. What's important is we apply these principles to our lives. So that's mostly looking at the kind of inner work of the activist, the change maker. And that's really important because we are the source of the change. Whatever state we're in is going to be reflected in our work. But what does it look like in the outer world? I'm obviously a bit biased, but I happen to think that one of the best examples of evolutionary change that have come about is the International Transition Towns movement, which started in 2005, 2006, in a little town in southwest England called Totnes, where they were looking at how to engage and mobilize their community to create a future beyond fossil fuels. And over time, over the last 18 years or so, that spread all over the world to more than 1,000 communities in 50 countries. And I think this movement is particularly brilliant because of the way that it was designed. With these kind of natural and universal patterns in mind. So the main model for what is transition, what does local transition initiative do, is this transition animal, which demonstrates the 7 key ingredients of transition. So we have context, understanding what we're up against, not just in vague terms, but really understanding all the different forces at play in our world, how they interact with each other, both on the big picture global scale and here locally in our own community. We need a vision that is comprehensive, inspiring, and realistic, to draw people in and to give us a sense of direction, what we're going to. We've talked a lot about already the inner transition and the importance of that. That is one of the essential ingredients of transition, which is fairly unique in terms of social change movements. Transition also recognizes we need to have healthy groups. That if a group is constantly mired in indecision and conflict, it's not going to be able to accomplish much. But if we're able to learn how to work together effectively without hierarchical structures, that we can unleash the collective genius. We can create groups that are more than the sum of their parts, and are forced to be reckoned with. We also need to engage our larger communities. We can't just be talking to ourselves, and more people over time. We need practical projects to demonstrate that our ideas actually work in reality, that they can be trusted, that they can provide a greater quality of life for the community as a whole and help meet the basic needs of individuals and families. And finally, we need to be part of a movement, because any one local initiative, no matter how successful, is just a kind of drop in the bucket when it comes to our global situation. So transition connects on regional, national, and international levels. So this is wonderful. It tells us all the different parts of transition that need to be working together to make this animal move, run, maybe even dance. But it doesn't tell us how these things change over time, right? There's like practical projects. When you're just starting out, no resources, no connections, no track record, no reputation. There's only certain things that you can do at that point. But what do you do to lay the groundwork, the foundation for bigger and bigger projects to happen over time? And what might eventually do when you have all the resources, connections, expertise, support that you need? So to that, I look to this somewhat forgotten model from transition movement founder Rob Hopkins' Transition Companion. He wrote one book in 2008 called the Transition Handbook that was very popular, helped spread the movement around the world. Came out with a second book in 2011 called the Transition Companion that he says in forward to my book was his worst selling book ever. I think there was a reason for that. There were 64 different tools and ingredients that it named and described that we could use to help affect this great transition. But that's too much for anybody to really keep in their mind at any one time. But I felt that there was something important there, so I kept looking, and I noticed that these 64 tools and ingredients were organized into 5 stages, which were only very briefly talked about. But I felt that they were important, particularly when I saw that they aligned with my experience of doing transition work on the ground and my observations of other people doing this kind of work. So naturally, we start with starting out, try our best ideas, throw them against the wall, see what sticks. We form an initiating group, a small group of people who are excited, motivated to help get this initiative off the ground, shepherd it through the early stages. And then we start raising awareness. We started putting on educational events and tabling at community festivals and holding community discussions and offering reskilling workshops that bring people together. These events and projects and discussions, they also serve the role of, helping to get us all on the same page. But the most important thing is it brings us together, establishes a kind of base of support for the initiative. And then, no matter what we're doing, we're asking the community, what is it? What's most important in your community? What are you excited to work on? What are our community's greatest needs? And we take a lead from that. So in Sarasota, we did dozens of what we might call awareness-raising events. The first year, two. This is an event called the Economics of Happiness Summit, where we screened this amazing film called The Economics of Happiness. It showed all these great local economic solutions for justice and sustainability around the world. And we had a World Cafe discussion afterwards to talk about how does this apply to us here in Sarasota? What of these ideas are relevant for us that we could replicate here? And it was great. And we had lots of people come out, lots of energy. But if we just kept doing this kind of thing, just talking, education, raising awareness, people would have gotten bored. They would have started to leave. So instead, we moved into the deepening stage. So this is about really focusing on what's working, cutting away the rest, and starting to launch practical projects based on the input that we've received from the community in the starting out stage. So example of this with Transition Sarasota was our Suncoast Gleaning Project, where we bring out dozens of volunteers to local farms to harvest whatever the farmer couldn't use, that wouldn't make it to market next week, or a field that he was going to till under and replant. And we would harvest that and donate that to the local food banks for the food insecure in our community. And this project is still running 14 years later. Donated over 500,000 pounds of local, mostly organic produce, and has rippled out over time to include farmers market, produce rescue, gleaning of residential fruit trees. It influenced our local food bank to go much farther in the direction of local produce. When we started this project, they weren't doing much with local produce at all. If you wanted fruits and vegetables and you couldn't afford them at the store, best you could probably hope for was some juice boxes and a can of soggy green beans. But subsequently to this, they saw, this can really work. And they put millions of dollars behind building new infrastructure and distribution systems to focus on local food, to focus on healthy produce. And in 2014, we got a call from the Florida Department of Agriculture saying, hey, we want to do a bunch of gleaning pilot projects around the state. Can we use you as a model? So even these kind of small initial projects, as you all know who are involved with Transition to Integrated Media, can ripple out, can inspire other communities to do the same, can scale up over time. So if we do this well and we can show a real impact, that we can do good quality work, we can start connecting more broadly. Of course, we're connecting all the way through this process, but in the beginning, it's mostly like-minded individuals and groups. But here, now that people see that we can actually make a real tangible difference, that opens up much wider to include, funders, media, businesses, other nonprofits, local government, key cultural institutions. And often weaving a lot of these different partners together into a coherent movement. So that was kind of our next step with Transition Sarasota. We launched annual Eat Local Week with dozens of partners coming together to produce dozens of events celebrating the best of local food and farming in Sarasota and Manatee counties. We also created an Eat Local resource guide and directory that mapped the whole local food system. And this is a picture of some of the organizers of the first annual Eat Local Week, receiving a proclamation from our county commissioner at the time, John Thaxton. So if we can do connecting well, we can begin to open a door to building. We bring in more resources, more support, more expertise. We broaden our reach. We develop more and more partnerships and coalitions that enable us to do larger scale projects. Yeah.
Do you have any kind of check-off test? So once you get to all beginnings are going to be rough to start.
Right.
And so I see you're connecting, building, starting out, are just kind of reminders that, okay, this is the starting out part. You're going to have to accept that you're going to have some difficulties at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And then see maybe a building is, okay, we're on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
So is there like a magic box to it? It has all the right terms in it so you can follow?
Like a diagnostic to be able to say, like, where are we in this process?
Yeah, I have the machine. Is it working or isn't it?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, I mean, I have a much more detailed description of each of these stages and what what usually happens at these points. What are the leverage points here in my book? But that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, you have all that data experience, so there can be like even just a little one page. Oh yeah, I remember in Chicago we did this.
Yeah.
So you have lots of data there and intent. So
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I may very well do that. So building, it's about scaling up, about systems changing strategies. It's about putting in place key infrastructure needed for a post-carbon society where it doesn't currently exist. This was about the place where I left off with Transition Sarasota. So in 2016, I burnt out and had to pass the torch to new leadership. And fortunately, there were people there to pick it up. Enough of a basis that people wanted to continue going with this, and it continues to exist to this day. And I started working with Transition US. So I don't have any great examples from Transition Sarasota of the building stage, but there are many from other places around the world. So Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Victory Garden Initiative that spun off from Transition Milwaukee, they have now, inspired by the Victory Garden movements of World War I and World War II, they've now planted over 6,000 gardens in every neighborhood of their city. And I'm kind of curious to do the research, how many blocks are actually in Milwaukee? So this might be 2, 3 per block. We're starting to approach the level and scale of change that we need to see in our world, that will give people real, credible hope, again, that the change is possible and that it can come from the grassroots. Or we could look to Liège in Belgium, where a transition initiative there started this Liège food belt, which has now spawned over 24 worker-owned, cooperative, local food businesses. Farms and markets and delivery services and land sharing services, wineries, granaries, breweries. And it has become a major initiative adopted by the regional government, moving towards greater food security and self-sufficiency. A lot of transition initiatives from England to Japan start local community-owned renewable energy companies that sometimes raise tens of millions of dollars from local small investors to put up wind turbines and solar arrays on public housing, reducing the energy bills for low-income residents and ensuring that any profits go back to the local investors, not big utility company shareholders. Transition is also famous for launching dozens of local community currencies. So these are not meant to replace the national currency, but to complement it. Because local currencies can only be spent at local businesses, wealth keeps circulating locally instead of getting siphoned off back to corporate headquarters. And some of these have been quite successful. In Bristol, England, over 300 businesses accepted it. The mayor took his full salary in it. You could use it to pay your taxes and ride the bus. You can get it from an ATM or use it pay by text. And they serve as powerful symbols of community pride, often featuring local hometown heroes like this one in Brixton, neighborhood of London, featuring David Bowie. How cool is that? Much cooler than our kind of drab olive green money with old George Washington on there. Transition initiatives are also becoming community development agencies, like in Totnes, where the transition movement began, where they're working to rehab a, I think it's 12 or 14 acre site right in the heart of downtown Totnes. There's been this defunct dairy factory for a couple of decades now, just sitting there, waiting until some private equity holding company can, the value raises enough that they can make a killing on it. But the community rallied together and put together a plan for this site that includes affordable housing, co-working spaces, local foods cafe, large arts and culture venue, all powered by 100% renewable energy. And they put this on the ballot. 87% of their town supported it. And they were able to raise the money to do this. They're still fighting through political blockages here, but I think it shows what a community can do and how it can take its power back from developers. And then the last example, Ungersheim transition, village in transition in France. The mayor, Jean-Claude Mensch, who seems to be a real mensch, watched one of the early transition documentaries, In Transition 1.0, and got really inspired and rallied his whole government behind the idea. And they put together a 21-point plan for a transition in their town. And they've completed it. They've done so many amazing things, just two. One is that they now produce 3 times more solar energy than the town needs, so they can export it to other communities. And 2 is they've used their public lands for all sorts of different regenerative projects. Community kitchens, eco-villages, regenerative farms, nature preserves. So this shows the power of what can happen when the bottom-up grassroots efforts meet with the top-down power of local government. But all of that would be a lot. But we also have this last stage of daring to dream, which Rob Hopkins said was about stepping up to national and international stages. How can we really have some power there? How can we actually win the future for justice and regeneration? Well, we have to at least think that way. How can we really do this? And I think the key is to helping as many groups, whether they're called transition or not, to go through this kind of a process and be thriving at the building stage. Really starting to make a dent in the universe of that local community, to change the trajectory of that community's future, the story it tells about itself, of where it's going. And if we can do that, if we can bring hope back to people through these kind of local, community-owned regenerative projects that are working, meeting people's needs, and showing the way to a better future. If we had 200, maybe 500,000 groups operating at this level in the US, people would start to notice there's something happening here. There's something that's really working. Currently, all this is flying underneath the radar of the mainstream media in big national politics. But it may not always be that way. Mother Earth herself is trying to wake us up to say we need this kind of bold action now. And she won't stop sending us reminders until we've learned our lesson. So I think somewhat, those of us who are leaders, we're not necessarily trying to make this all happen. But what we're doing is we're laying a strong enough foundation by showing another vision, by doing practical projects and showing that there are real alternatives to the status quo, that as people begin to wake up and start seeking out some different way, that they have a place that they can go. They have a place that they have something that can bring them real hope. A lot of people right now are feeling overwhelmed by the global situation, by our own national situation. So something like this could really stand out and could encourage us to go down the regenerative path instead of the path of authoritarianism, and scapegoating, and magical thinking, impossible promises. And it's already happening in a lot of places. It's happening right here. I mentioned before about 1,000 transition groups around the world, 25 regional national hubs supporting them, over 50 countries represented. But it's really about this larger movement of movements. In 2007, at the Pioneers Conference in San Rafael, California, Paul Hawken estimated that there were 130,000 groups at that time working for social and environmental justice. And subsequently, he started a website called Wiser Earth, later wiser.org. They cataloged over 114,000 different groups. So we are not alone in this. Hawkins says that this is the biggest movement that the world has ever seen. But a lot of people don't notice it because it doesn't have a single name or a single charismatic leader. And I think that's as it should be. We need to work together more, but we also need to try lots of different approaches. And we need more people to get involved. If we can do that, I think that, we still have a path to a better world. It's not too late. It's really never too late. Change direction. This is the founder of the transition movement, Rob Hopkins. What I like to say the answer to what would Harry Potter look like if he grew up and became an environmentalist? So yeah, I know you're already doing a lot of this work here in media, and I really commend you for it. It's been something that a lot of communities have learned about and have taken heart from. That they can do this as well because you've done it here. And my only suggestion is, let's keep up in our game. As we go, we don't have to do it all at once. We don't have to, reach beyond our capabilities, but one step at a time, we can regenerate the world, regenerate our culture, our society, the ecology, and ourselves. So thank you very much. As usual, I'm running over time, but hopefully we can go a little bit long to have some questions. Please.
I wonder how you understand the fact that everything you're talking about is an evolution and it's also a return. So, I haven't seen your book yet, I'd love to look at it, but I'm just curious how you frame that because it's both and that's hard to describe.
To some degree, we can look at it in both ways and both have reasons to recommend them. To acknowledge that humans have lived in a sustainable fashion for hundreds of thousands of years. That this is something that, maybe we could even say is embedded in our evolutionary past, that we know how to do this if we can unlearn a lot of our conditioning and humble ourselves. And in a way, I think that just saying we're going back to something earlier is probably also not very accurate. 8 billion people on the planet now. We can't necessarily live in the same ways that we did before. And we have novel problems that we have to contend with. And we've also learned a lot during this, period of modern civilization that I think could be helpful bringing forward. That we don't just want to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. I think it's important to recognize that there are some really important emergent properties that have come out of this time of rapid growth and industrialization that couldn't have really emerged at any other time in history. And to take advantage of that as we go forward. So I think that's why I message it as a kind of evolution that combines the best of the past with the best of the present to make a new synthesis that will be our future. Hopefully. Well, that's a great question. Other questions?
Like when you started to show the 5 stages of transition mapped out on that U curve, and also in your book there are a whole bunch of other U curves in there, but for the most part the U curves don't really show any equivalent to the presencing. And I'm wondering,
It's true in a lot of models.
if you could talk a little bit about the bridge work from deepening to the connecting and building. Like, is there some sort of equivalent of presencing in there that like does that bridge?
You know, the reason that I initially show in my book the 5 stages as a pattern of transformation and as the U shape. But yeah, when I refer to it later, we have this more kind of spiral path. So within every stage, we could see, a transformation process happening there. So when we're deepening, when we're starting out to deepen, we still don't really know if our ideas about what this might be are going to work, if they're going to catch on. And I think there is a kind of, even going into this, a moment of really presencing what is it? Where do we put our stake in the ground? What will be our first practical project? And how will that connect up to a kind of further sequence of development and building power? And still, we don't really know. So there's a lot of experimentation in there, a lot of iteration. So I don't know. A lot of this, they're roughly equivalent. All models don't have necessarily every aspect explicit in them. But I think that, all of the 7 stages of Theory U apply at different points within this journey. So there are people who,
So maybe the presencing aspect of the deepening would be like self-assessment of what you've tried so far and like what worked and what didn't work.
possibly, I think that can be part of it. I think that can also be part of the crystallizing prototyping stage. Crystallizing might be more about soliciting input, and prototyping might be more about soliciting feedback to continue to iterate. But there are organizations that do try to intentionally incorporate an aspect of presencing into their work and decision making. Transition Colorado is one such organization. Everybody that I worked through was aware of Theory U, had studied Theory U, and there was a sense of let's experiment with this. Let's very intentionally apply that process, particularly when we were doing strategic planning, and starting out and kind of looking at all the different factors and trying to make sense of that, and then really feeling into that as a group. What does this really mean? What is trying to emerge here? Which is a very different way than our dominant mechanistic paradigm of how things work. The question of what is trying to emerge here almost seems nonsensical from the viewpoint of the dominant culture. But for those of us who are somewhat tuned in to spiritual principles, to natural principles, it makes perfect sense, and it's kind of indispensable. So yeah, I mean, Otto Scharmer has this Presencing Institute and offers on a pretty regular basis these U-Labs where groups can come together to specifically work with that model. It's not an easy thing, and if people aren't all on board with it, it's not going to work. Because it's a very, it can be a very subjective thing. What is trying to emerge? We might have all ideas about that. But if we drop down below our thinking mind and feel into that question, we might actually find that there's something there waiting for us. So yeah, I think it's a good question. I'm not 100% sure how to answer it at this point, but that's my best for now. Yeah. Thank you. Do you have any other ideas about where that might fit in this process? I mean, it's interesting that even if you go to all the way back to Joanna Macy and the work that reconnects, that we have some kind of, she puts a positive flip on downloading and sacred from gratitude. And then there's this kind of seeing, sensing, and honoring our pain for the world. She doesn't really name the presencing moment, which is interesting because it's definitely there in the work that reconnects, but it's not specifically named.
Like trying to translate it mentally to how this works for groups and communities, because inner work and inner self-reflection, like how do you think about a communal counterpart or a group level counterpart?
One is introducing things like this to groups that you're working with and say, is this something that can be helpful? Let's try and experiment with this together, see how it goes. But yeah, it is very different from what most of us are used to. We're mechanistic paradigm is predict and control. We want to go straight from point A to point B without going on a journey, without going, into any reflection and contemplation and experimentation. We're just hoping to hit the jackpot. But that often doesn't work. Fantasy and reality fall through the chasm in the middle of it if we don't do this kind of deeper work. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just a little follow-up to the Theory U question Robin posed. And as you're flipping through the slides, I'm noticing another pattern, which is the ancient things that you brought up, like the Buddhist mandala and the medicine wheel and the yin-yang symbol. Those are all circular, I noticed. And then as we're talking about the U theory, I'm valuing it and I'm sensing it, but I'm also noticing this upward trajectory with the arrow. And it makes me think of this modern problem of this expectation of endless growth. And something someone brought up in the workshop yesterday was pretty profound. For this slide, she asked, what about performing? Like, at some point, don't you need to reevaluate? Like, there's a reforming stage, and it seems like we could translate that into a circle. And I'm not familiar with the U theory and how it works, but would you see that being maybe a more long-term or like a model that would complete it better? Like, where does it go from here? Like, I just wonder, like, what's next when we see this upward growth arrow?
Yeah, you're right. Right? So we're doing this, but then we start another cycle. We gotta let go of our downloading again, what we think we know, who we think we are. At the next level, and to continue that journey, seeing, sensing, presencing, crystallizing, prototyping, performing. And yeah, I think the reason why Theory U is you, actually a couple of reasons. One is because this is a kind of, almost like a disintegration process, a letting go process. And there's a real feeling of kind of dropping down from the mind into the heart. So you can almost see it what the human body is like, from the head to the heart to the hands. But there is a real feeling of kind of going down into the depths of things and then emerging back up into the light, which is, you could say that's a process of death and rebirth. And that's very real. This is not continued, our culture, endless growth, no death, endless immortality, endless youth. It doesn't happen that way. We know that, but we try to pretend that that's not the case. So this has both the death and the rebirth aspects to it. So it's not a continual kind of line pointing upwards like this. That would be wrong. But it's also not exactly a circle. I mean, you could say this is a circle. You could put it in the form of a circle, saying, we go through this many times. After we get to performing, we found something that reliably works. But then in order to keep evolving, we have to kind of let go of that and keep going. So bad news. It's hard to go through transformation. And we don't just go through it once. But we all know that. Right? But yeah, if you put it as a circle, there is a sense that we're ending right where we began. And that's not exactly true. I mean, it's sort of true in that, there's this kind of, letting go of this and coming back to this. But in a sense, we're actually changed. We do progress in wisdom, and compassion, and love, and impact as we go through this process again and again, and that enables us to ripple out to these different levels. So it's, want people not to get hung up too much on the visual forms of these. I mean, if they're helpful, that's great. They're designed to be helpful, to kind of think about this. Remember, all these are thinking tools. They're not, if they're helpful, they're helpful. If they're not, they're not. But trying to see the essence beneath them. And I think, your question is a good one. It has real practical implications. But some of it just, you need to continue to contemplate this over and over again to really get a feel for what these patterns actually mean in life, in activism, in all sorts of situations. And over time, this material has become a lot more meaningful to me over the years, and I suspect that would be true for others. Because there's a lot there to uncover. There's a lot to read between the lines here. I hope you found this interesting, useful, thought-provoking, inspiring. Again, thank you to Transition Town Grading Media, particularly to Skip and Shari. And I hope you all have a wonderful
Thank you.
night.
We appreciate it.